what we've got to remember is at the time that the Bible was written, there weren't any bold, italic, different fonts. A lot of
Comic Sans.
No Comic Sans. No emojis. So they used very different literary devices to grab your attention.
That's really helpful.
And one of the most used ways of saying this is important is repetition.
Okay.
So when you get repetition, it's like the scriptural way of using bold, italic, underline with double exclamation points.
It's that time again. It's season 7 of the All Nations Church podcast. I'm James Aubrey. Kier Adams and Chris Hamer-Hodges are still with me. We're talking about the book of Daniel. We've reached the halfway point. We've been through the stories. Highlights so far, Kier?
Do you know what? I don't think I've ever thought this in depth about the book of Daniel, and it has been incredibly inspiring. So I think my favourite thing is just to see like the overarching narrative, how it just links into the story of Christ.
Yeah.
You know that the Bible is pointing towards Christ, but when you start looking into the details,
you
see how much so that is. It's been great.
I've loved that, and I've really loved Chris's explanation of the purpose of trials, that they're in God's hand, they're already numbered before they start, that there's a purpose in them that brings you out to greater glory. I've really loved that.
Yeah.
Do you remember a couple of years ago when I suggested to you we should do a podcast on every book of the Bible?
Yes.
And your reaction was kind of less than faith-filled.
Here we are, doing it.
Well, I think it's because it's a very badly formed idea on my part at the time. But this has been a real treat. Thanks for being with us, Chris. We're really enjoying diving into the book of Daniel.
Yeah.
And we've not only have we reached the halfway point of the book, but we've reached a really important change in the way the book functions. We've got one more chapter left in Aramaic, as you explained to us from before. But before we dive into chapter 7, and before we go any further, it's probably worth us kind of reflecting on the fact that the second half of the book of Daniel is made up of very different material from the first, or rather we should say it's far less narrative based than the first half, isn't it?
That's right.
So what do we encounter as a whole in the second half of the book of Daniel?
So, in the first part of the book of Daniel, we encounter, as you say, narrative stories.
Yeah.
And if we encounter dreams or visions, they're other people's dreams and visions that Daniel is interpreting. So now we kind of get the treat of seeing the dreams and the visions that Daniel himself had.
Yeah.
So these are not tied specifically to other events, but were revelations of God that Daniel himself was given and then recounts to us.
And it's probably worth talking a bit before we go any further as well about the kind of language and imagery we're going to find, don't we? So, everyone has dreams. I think, most people have dreams. I had a dream last night. It was fairly uneventful. It involved, some people I've been with over the weekend. It was quite easy to remember and understand. Yeah. But we're dealing with a lot of symbolism.
Yes.
Which is not uncommon in biblical literature, is it?
No.
We're also dealing with lots of numbers.
Yes.
Which is also not uncommon in certain types of the Bible.
Yeah.
So perhaps we could just say a little bit about how we navigate portions of the Bible that are less literal than others. And what are some kind of useful ways of approaching metaphors, symbols, numbers, things like that, because we can't pretend they're not in the Bible, because they are, aren't they?
Yeah. It's a really important question, and I think this is where people tend to get unstuck or unglued or go off the rails. There are certainly a lot of wild and wacky interpretations on some of these visions, because when they are symbolic, it's important that you understand the symbolism. Yeah. And whether you know it or not, every Christian already understands a certain basic level of symbolism. So when we're on a Sunday and we're saying, "Worthy is the Lamb, worthy is the Lamb," someone who's coming in off the street might think, why are they singing about a baby sheep? But we understand the symbolism.
Yeah.
Jesus is the lamb because he's the sacrificial lamb, the lamb who was slain. So it's really important that you're able to unlock these symbolisms, because if you take it too literally or you apply a meaning that it didn't possess, you end up with the wrong conclusion.
Yeah.
The other important thing is that, as we've mentioned before, that the best interpreter of the scriptures are the scriptures themselves.
Yeah.
So one of the key tools, and we've already looked at this before, is when you find a difficult passage, is to think about, well, what are the parallel passages?
Yeah. Okay.
Where do I see a kind of similar narrative or similar imagery? And often the stuff that is impenetrable in one story is revealed in the other.
Okay.
And then you can use your insights from one of the parallels to unlock the imagery in the other.
Very useful.
And so when we come to the book of Daniel and we see some of the imagery, we'll see how some of it interprets itself.
Yeah.
So that's the first place to start, is to read on to the end of the chapter and see
Explains what.
see if it explains it, just like Jesus explained his own parables.
Yeah.
The other is to look in other parts in the Old Testament. So like, where was there a image of gold of a beast that was worshipped, and find imagery. Where was there another faithful man of God who was taken into exile, served faithfully and was exalted? To look at where that imagery occurs. And then you can also use that as a key to unlock other things. As I said, Daniel is like the little brother to Revelation. So when you've understood some of these imageries in Daniel, you can see how they unlock some of the difficult imagery in Revelation. So that's what I'd say on the images. In terms of numbers, I think you have to be careful you don't go down a rabbit hole with numbers.
We're not saying there's a Bible code.
No. I think there are some numbers which do have a clear meaning, and other numbers where it's more speculative, and it probably is not helpful to speculate too deeply.
Yeah.
Sometimes the most significant thing is just that they are numbered.
Yeah.
As we said, one of the themes in Daniel is that every trial is numbered before it begins, and that's why you see so many numbers in Daniel.
Yeah, that's really
it's
useful.
God is telling his servants ahead of time and saying, when you're in the middle of it, it's going to feel like it may go on forever, but it's not.
Yeah.
I've numbered it and will bring it to an end at its appointed time. But having said that, there are some numbers which are really key, like the number 7, which is really significant in terms of indicating perfection and wholeness, because God completed the act of creation on the 7th day. And the number 12, which is important, representing God's people, because there are 12 tribes, 12 apostles. And also together, 7 and 12 are heavenly numbers, because there are 7 times the sun rises in a week, and there are 12 phases of the moon in a year. And so we see, while man is kind of intent on decimalizing everything so that we can count things on our fingers, in God, we see that things tend to be done in 7s and in 12s.
Right.
And then this is already really helpful. And then the last thing I suppose we need to just consider is, as we get into these the visions that Daniel has, they are there are prophecies in the Old Testament and New Testament that are predominantly kind of revelatory, aren't they? They reveal mysteries, or they provide encouragement, or sometimes judgment. Yeah. Daniel's visions are almost entirely predictive, aren't they?
Yes.
They're to do with events that hadn't happened when Daniel was alive.
Correct.
But have happened before we were alive.
Yes.
I tried to say that as carefully as I could.
That's really important. I think it's important to have in mind that prophetic timeline and to understand where the prophet is on that timeline
Yeah.
and where we are on that timeline.
Yeah.
Because for Daniel, all these things were future.
Mm-hmm.
For us, some of them may still be future when Daniel was prophesying, because he didn't just prophesy about the rise and fall of kingdoms. He also spoke about...
there's definitely some stuff about the coming of the Lord.
Yeah,
the second
and
time,
the
towards
resurrection
end,
of the dead.
Resurrection of the, that's why I was just trying to think carefully how I was going to say it as I was saying it.
In fact, Daniel, one of the things is remarkable about the book of Daniel is it's the only place in the Old Testament that explicitly mentions the resurrection of the dead, which is amazing when you think about how central a theme it is in the New Testament. That in the Old Testament there's only one explicit mention, and that's right at the end of the book of Daniel, where it says, "Many who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting reward and some to everlasting punishment. And you, Daniel, will shine like a star." So yes, it's important, and I think that's the importance of seeing the parallel, because many of Daniel's visions, they are repetitions. And so it's important to be able to overlay them with that timeline and say, where are the similarities and where are the new bits, and what for us is future and what for us is past.
Yeah, but we're very clear, and we talk about it today, that these visions were... Daniel had these visions. Yeah. They were for a future time. Yeah. These weren't written by a follower of Daniel or a subsequent person hundreds of years later, as some liberal scholars would say. We're convinced that the most obvious and simple explanation for this is that God showed Daniel what was going to happen in the future hundreds of years before it did. Yeah.
There are, as you say, there are some liberal scholars who believe that the book of Daniel was written much later, in the time of the Maccabees, the Jewish revolt, because they find it impossible that someone living 600 years before Christ would have been able to accurately predict the rise and fall of all the nations up to the fall of the Hellenistic empires and the king of the north and the king of the south, which we'll get into. But yeah, we completely dismiss that for a number of reasons. One is because the visions of Daniel don't stop at that time, but continue into the Roman Empire. Yeah. So framing it in that time frame doesn't take away the fact that Daniel correctly prophesied about the nature of the first 10 Roman emperors. It doesn't explain how Ezekiel, who was a contemporary, mentioned him. Yeah. It doesn't explain how Jesus referenced and considered Daniel to be authentic. And I think one of the biggest nails in the coffin for that theory is that the Book of Maccabees itself referenced Daniel, which it wouldn't be able to do if it was being written at the same time. So yeah, the only reason is people who cannot believe that you could have predictive prophecy that is as accurate. But for those of us who do, then, as I say, it just brings home the awe of God's sovereignty in the rise and fall of the kingdoms of men.
Yeah, and that's really, really helpful. Now, when we did some podcasts with your good friend Matthew Ling, last year before, hundreds of years before, could have been any time, couldn't it? Well, we talked a little bit about eschatology, a little bit about the Book of Revelation.
Yes,
and he explained to us some different ways that you can read the Book of Revelation in terms of preterist and futurist and historicist and stuff like that. Do those kind of schools of reading also lend themselves to Revelation's little brother Daniel?
Yes, very much so. So there are different, I guess not so much in some of the visions, because helpfully we get a key. So particularly like in chapter 2, we were told that the head of bronze, the head of gold was the Babylonian Empire, and that the chest and arms of gold were the Medo-Persians. Later, when we come to the interpretations, we're told about the rise of the Greek Empire, and particularly we'll see that in the vision of the ram and the goat. Yeah. So it's helpful when the Bible interprets itself in the same context. But always where it doesn't, it allows a bit of scope for people to kind of either project it into the future and say it's talking about the end times, which would be the futurist position, or to try and read things into, the newspaper.
General principles of history, yeah.
Yeah, and try and say that these are things that are unfolding today,
Right.
which, you can kind of twist it and contort it to match almost every period of history, and people have. But
I always find it amazing how Eurocentric or how Anglocentric all those interpretations are.
That's right.
as if African or Latin American history doesn't matter at all.
But I think if we allow the Bible to interpret itself, and we use particularly the vision of the statue and the rock as our key, that everything that Daniel prophesying falls in that prophetic timeline.
Okay.
From where Daniel was to the rise and fall of the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, the Greeks, the Romans, and then an establishing of the kingdom that is going to endure right to the end, and then a final judgment. That is the prophetic timeline into which everything else fits.
That's really helpful. That's a really helpful way of looking at it. It's like the initial numbers you get in the Sudoku puzzle, isn't it? Here's your starter, you can fill everything else in. Yeah. So with that in mind, shall we dive into our first vision?
Yes, sure.
So Daniel chapter 7 is the first one. It's the last Aramaic chapter in the book of Daniel.
Yep.
Would you like the challenge, Chris, of trying to sum up for us what happens in Daniel chapter 7? Give us a bit of a recap before we interpret it and discuss little bits of it.
I'm going to break this into two parts.
That sounds really sensible.
Because I think Daniel 7 can be thought of in two halves. So the first half is a vision of the beasts from the sea.
Okay.
So Daniel has this dream, and he dreams about the sea in turmoil. The winds of heaven are churning up the sea. And as he looks at the churning and the turmoil of the sea, something really strange happens. Beasts come up out of the sea. This sequence of beasts rise up out of the water. And the first one looks like a lion, but it has wings like an eagle. And then the second one looks like a bear, but it's a lopsided bear that's kind of raised up more on one side than the other, and it has 3 ribs in its mouth. And then the third beast looks like a leopard, but it has 4 wings, and it's exceptionally swift in flight. And then he sees this fourth beast, this terrifying beast, this 10-horned beast, which is more fearful and frightening than all the others. So that's the first half, and then he asks, well, what's the interpretation, and that takes us then into the second half, which is where he gets a glimpse into the throne room of heaven. So having seen the beasts, which spoiler alert are the kind of nations, the rebellious nations on the earth, he sees into the order, the kind of courtyard, the courtroom order of heaven, where there sits a judge who has authority over all, the Ancient of Days. And then he sees something else quite remarkable. He sees one like a son of man, who's led into the presence of the Ancient of Days, the judge of all, and to whom all nations and tribes and men of every language give their worship. And he is given a kingdom that endures and lasts forever. And this I think is, when I said there are some chapters in Daniel that are like parts of the New Testament that have slipped, certainly the second half of Daniel 7 seems like that to me, that what we're seeing there is such a powerful picture of Christ and his kingdom, and how he has a part to play as our advocate before the Father, who is the judge of all the living and the dead, who ultimately pronounces the judgment on these beasts and brings them to an end.
So, beasts from the sea sounds like it's a slightly unusual turn of phrase, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is that do beasts normally come from the sea in the scriptures?
No, this is interesting. is that the Bible has its own classification of creatures. So we tend to look at the scriptures through our modern lens, and sometimes we can miss these details. So a lot of us will have done biology at school, and we learned that creatures are birds and reptiles and amphibians and mammals and crustaceans and mollusks and all these different classifications of creatures. But what we forget is that this is a very modern classification. It's only been in the last 2 or 3 centuries that we've divided animals in this way. And of course, to the evolutionist, man finds his place as a mammal in that place. Whereas the Bible has a very different classification, a much more simple classification. And it's kind of divided into the 3 realms of nature, the sky, the sea, and the land. And so the Bible classification is, if it swims in the sea, it's a fish. If it flies in the air, it's a bird. And if it crawls on the earth, it's a beast.
Right.
And then man is separate, is placed above that. And that's why it says, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. So that's the order of God in creation, that the birds are in the air, the fish are in the sea, and the beasts are in the land. So, yeah, as you've correctly pointed out, James, when we see beasts coming up from the sea, we're seeing something that is contrary to the created order of God, to the rule of God. So this as well as the imagery of the churning sea itself, which is something which is linked often to the turmoil of the nations in their struggle against the rule of God.
That's interesting, because so often water is a really important kind of divine image. So rivers, and streams, and water, all actually denote something divine, don't they? They communicate to us something about the person of the Spirit. We looked at in the podcast we just done. Check out series 6 of the podcast if you haven't. But that image of kind of raging sea is something entirely different.
That's right, So it's a theme that you get, going back to the Exodus, where it says God rebuked the sea and brought his people through on dry land. And that's kind of used as like a metaphor for rebuking Pharaoh and Pharaoh's kind of attempt to abuse and oppose the people of God. Again, in some of the Psalms and some of the prophetic writing, the rage of the nations is linked to the roaring and the tossing of the sea. And God has set a limit to them and say, thus far and no further. This is where your proud waves stop. So that even these powerful kings have their limits set by God.
So in this image of beasts on the sea coming from a raging sea, we're seeing something created but not in right relationship with its creator.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And do we have any clue as to who or what those beasts are?
Yes, we do, because again, Daniel asks, and he's told that these beasts represent 4 nations that will rise on the earth. And again, we can see a parallel between these beasts and the statue, which, as we've just said, is our prophetic timeline, our plumb line to help us understand the rest. So there is a direct correspondence between the lion and the Babylonian Empire, the bear and the Medo-Persian Empire, the leopard and the swift conquest of the entire known world under Alexander the Great. And then the terrifying beast would be the Roman Empire that came next. And it was in the time of that empire that you remember that the stone cut out by the rock. So what we're seeing here is Daniel's own, if you like, repeat or seeing a reenactment of that vision of the statue played out, but in beasts rather than statues.
And is that because... Is that an attempt to... Does one image denote some kind of positive qualities of the empire and another denote their destructive qualities? Or is it purely these are 2 different visions that are communicating the same kind of truths?
I think they're 2 visions that are communicating the same kind of truth. What we've got to remember is at the time that the Bible was written, there weren't any bold, italic, different fonts, a lot of
no
the
Comic Sans.
no Comic Sans, no emojis. So they used very different literary devices to grab your attention.
That's really helpful.
And one of the most used ways of saying this is important is repetition.
Okay.
So when you get repetition, it's like the scriptural way of using bold, italic, underline with double exclamation points.
Yeah. Which is still the same in some oral cultures today, actually.
Yeah.
That's really helpful.
Because the other thing is, remember, there was another vision of beasts coming up out of the water that Joseph interpreted for Pharaoh. And at that time, Pharaoh himself had two different dreams that meant the same thing.
Yes, of course.
And part of Joseph's interpretation was, the Lord has given you these two dreams. They're one and the same, but he has given you these two dreams to show you that the matter is firmly decided and it will certainly take place.
Whereas when Daniel interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dream about the tree, which is a singular dream, at the end of it, Daniel says, there's an opportunity for you to repent.
That's right, yeah.
So that was a dream, it was a warning, rather than a complete judgment.
Yes.
Okay. Can we focus in a little bit on one of the beasts then? With that one, to get too speculative.
Yep.
So that final beast, the terrifying beast, the iron teeth. He's got iron teeth, is that right?
Yeah, that's right, and Jaws, 10 horns.
Jaws from James Bond. Do we know anything about those 10 horns? What's a horn? Because we'll come on to visions later on, pay lots of attention to horns of different kind of animals, don't they? Yeah. So what's a horn? Why are they important? Do they represent something for us?
Yeah, they do. Horns represent rule and authority.
Okay, because for an animal, it's their power, it's their ability.
Yeah. And so, not just in Daniel, but throughout the scriptures, it talks about, I will raise up a horn.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a symbol in the scripture of someone whose power has been raised up. So horns in Daniel, and particularly in these dreams, are associated with rulers or kings.
Okay.
And by correspondence then, when you see a little horn, it's normally referring to a prince or someone who has not yet assumed authority.
Yeah.
And certainly that fits with historical accounts when you interpret the horns as kings and the little horns as princes. Then you can see quite a strong correspondence both in this vision, the 10 horns, and the first 10 Roman emperors.
Okay, so those that beast with 10 horns.
Yeah,
we know it's representing the Roman Empire. We know that from Daniel 2. We know that from the setting up of the kingdom.
Yeah.
So those 10 horns represent 10 kings, 10 emperors, 10 Caesars.
10 Caesars,
of the Roman Empire.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So starting off with Julius, and then Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and then Vespasian.
Okay.
And now, though the Roman Empire didn't end there, but the Jewish nation did. That was when Jerusalem fell, was under the reign of Vespasian.
Okay.
So when we kind of look at some more of the prophetic imageries, both in Daniel and also significantly in the New Testament, it's not just talking about the end days and the final judgment of the world, but also the last days and the final judgment on the Jewish nation, which happened in AD 70 at the time of the Emperor Vespasian, that 10th horn, where Jerusalem was sacked and the temple was burnt.
Yeah, that's a very significant date, isn't it? Both in kind of Jewish history and really biblical history.
Yeah.
So Jesus makes reference to that in the Synoptic Gospels.
He does.
I think there are references to in the Book of Revelation.
Yes.
I think I'm quite happy with an early date of Revelation, because I think there's some predictions around AD 70 there. But that's a really key moment, isn't it? So
it is.
Jerusalem falls and the temple system dies out, never to be
restored.
Revived.
Yeah, that's right.
So that really is quite a seismic
Yes.
moment for the Jewish nation.
Yeah. And I think it's significant then that often the events of AD 70 get telescoped into accounts of the last day and final judgment. And it's important that we can, that as we talked about, finding where's the prophet's place in the timeline and where's our place on the timeline, so that we don't see things as future that have already happened. Yeah. So, for example, when the disciples come to Jesus and they point out the temple and you say, see all these beautiful stones, and Jesus tells you, I tell you the truth, not one stone will be left on the other. And the disciples ask him a question, but in reality they ask him two questions, because they say, when will all this happen and what will be the signs of your coming? Yeah. And Jesus answers both questions, because what he then says is about when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, do not go back. And he talks about the destruction of the temple. And he said, I tell you the truth, there are some standing here who won't taste death until these things happen. He's talking about the events of AD 70, which happened within 40 years, a generational span of the time he was speaking. But then he goes on to talk about, and then the angels will come and gather the elect from one corner of the earth to another. And so it's important then that we understand that we're seeing two events telescoped together, both of which were future, both of which were talking about different aspects of the last days and final judgment. But for us, one of them is past and one is still really future.
Helpful. Yeah.
Very helpful.
Very, yeah.
Let's jump back to Daniel 7 then. There's a turn of phrase that Daniel uses. He uses it here, I think, for the first time, although you're the expert, so it might not be. He uses it later on.
Yeah.
And if my memory serves me right, it's used then also in the New Testament.
Yeah.
And that's this slightly peculiar phrase of time, times, and half a time.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So I mentioned that there are some numbers that are significant and there are some numbers that aren't significant. And I mentioned that 7 is a very significant number. And so another number that is significant is this number 3.5, because it's half a 7. Okay. So what God starts, he finishes. And he finishes, 7 represents God's finished and completed work. But a lot of things we experience not from the beginning or not from the end, but we're in the middle. We're a bit like Habakkuk. We're in the midst of the days. We've heard of your fame and we know how things are going to work out at the end, but we still need to call on God to renew his fame in the midst of the years. And so 3.5 is significant in that it's that prophetic time in between the Alpha and the Omega, in between the authoring and the perfecting, in between the initiating and the finishing. It's that period in the middle, in the midst of the 7. It's half a 7. And so a time times and half a time is just one of the many ways that the scripture poetically says the same thing in different ways. It's something that both preachers and poets have in common, in that they'll say the same thing in multiple different ways to get the point across. So sometimes you hear it in terms of 3.5 years. Other times you'll hear it as 42 months, and other times you hear it as
1260 days.
Thank you, 1260 days. Yeah. But it's all referring to that same prophetic time period, and it kind of finds its zenith, if you like, in the motifs of Scripture during the time of Elijah. Elijah was a man, we're told, like us, who prayed and it didn't rain, and then he prayed again. Yeah, 3.5 years. And he was a man who had been given authority to bind and loose and to open and shut the heavens, just like Jesus would later give the authority to his disciples and by extension to us, that what we bind on earth will have already been bound in heaven. But the time of his prophesying was 3.5 years. So it becomes this recurring motif in Scripture, this 3.5. It's the time of God's prophetic people who are in the midst of God's work and have not yet seen it come to its fruition, but are a part of its outworking, just as Elijah was in his day.
So half a time can often mean 3.5 years, effectively.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, for that time and half a time, you've got time 1 times 2 and half a time a half. So if you had to get
times and half a time.
Times and half a
1,
time
2
and a half. Yeah. So it's, as I say, it's a poetic way of saying 3.5, because your time means 1, your times mean 2, and then your half is a half. So if you add 1 plus 2 plus a half, you get 3.5.
Yeah. And yet you do get that with Elijah's ministry. That's why there's some speculation around Jesus having an earthly ministry for 3.5 years.
Yes.
Okay. Really helpful. So just before we jump onto that, the second half of Daniel 7, where we meet the Ancient of Days and the Son of Man, how would you sum up the message of the vision of the beasts? If you had to kind of sum it up, what would you sum it up as?
Yeah, I think the important takeaway, one, is so that we recognise the imagery, because as we discover it later in Revelation, when the beast from the sea comes up and he looks like a part lion, part leopard, part bear, part 10-horned creature, and you see it's a composite. So again, it helps to inform us once we've recognised that symbolism. We've got a key that we can use to see that John is not prophesying about an end-time monster or some kind of fearful antichrist. He's just talking about the continuity of nations in rebellion to God right up to the end. So it helps for us to frame ourselves that, again, just as we did with the vision of the statue, God's sovereignty, that even though nations seem really powerful, and particularly this last beast, the Roman Empire, seemed like it was going to last forever, but it didn't. It's to give encouragement to the saints that even in the midst of powerful nations whose rulers may be hostile to the purpose of God, God is working out his eternal kingdom plan.
Love that. I'm just reading a book about the end of the Cold War. It's a non-fiction account of some of the CIA's secret work in Eastern Europe, and it's set mostly in Poland, and you kind of see the ups and downs of people are suddenly hopeful everything's they're all going to be liberated, and then the Soviets come in for one last push to kind of depress everybody, and then they're rising up again. And people who lived through that period of time, people who lived through the Cold War, who lived or continue to live under very repressive governments, can feel like it's going to go on forever, can't they? But when a tyrant is gone, it's as if they were never here.
Exactly, yeah.
And oh, how the mighty have fallen, eh?
Indeed, yeah.
Right, let's come on to the second half of chapter 7, which you mentioned, which is another one of our kind of New Testament prequels.
Yes, indeed.
So we have a really clear picture here of both God the Father and God the Son, don't we?
Yes, we do.
We have what I like to call the Simpsons view of God. Talk to us about the Ancient of Days.
Yeah, so the Ancient of Days is sat on his throne. So we were given this kind of anthropomorphic view of God. So anthropomorphic just means where you ascribe human qualities to something or someone who is not human. So many people anthropomorphize their pets, ascribe human qualities to something that's not human. We know that God is not a man. He's not a son of man that he should lie. But here we see imagery where God sits like a ruler, like a judge. He is a judge. But we're given this kind of anthropomorphic view of God, the Simpsons view, if you like, where it's of this Ancient of Days, this kind of pinnacle of wisdom and maturity, which I think is great. Being a man of greyed hairs, many people try to hide their grey hairs, but you read of these revelations where God himself is revealed with hair that's white like wool.
The Bible celebrates grey hair.
It does.
There's no negative connotations to grey hair.
Grey hair is the splendour of the old, just as strength is the glory of the young. And so I think we sometimes lose that there's a dignity and a part of the character and nature of God that is in every phase of life. And rather than trying to either rush forward to the next or try and recapture the old, I think there's a real wisdom in leaning into the grace that is for your current area of life. And certainly for the grey-haired, for the old, that is this idea of kind of wisdom and gravitas and someone who's able to give good judgments, and God obviously epitomizes that and is seen as this wise old, he's not a man but appears as this wise old judge with white hair who sat on a throne, and all things are under his feet, including
the beasts of the sea,
including the beast, and including the lake of fire. That's a point that we sometimes lose in the kind of some of the imagery, where from some of the artistic periods of the past, where we get this idea of Satan being this red horned figure who's the Lord of hell, almost a rival to God. That's not what hell is like. Hell is currently empty, and it's reserved as a place of judgment for the devil and his angels and the beast and those who follow him. And it won't be a place of his satanic headquarters, but a place of his eternal punishment. And hell is not a place where the devil reigns. Everything in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, including the lake of fire itself, we find it in Daniel under the throne of God.
Right.
So even the place of eternal punishment is a place where God rules and reigns.
Wow. Amazing.
Yeah.
And then into this amazing cosmic scene comes the Son of Man.
That's right.
A phrase that's only really used in Daniel and Ezekiel once or twice.
Yeah.
Is going to have a huge significance in the New Testament.
Yes.
Tell us about the Son of Man.
Yes. It's interesting that actually it's only in Daniel, and perhaps this is why this is the last chapter that's still in Aramaic. Why do we not switch back to Hebrew when the visions start? Why is there one more chapter? Because this is the only place in the Old Testament where we encounter the Son of Man in Aramaic.
Wow.
Which is the title that Jesus then uses for himself in Aramaic.
Yeah.
So when Jesus uses the Son of Man, he's not using the Hebrew phrase, which would have been used by Ezekiel and some of the other prophets. Son of Man, what do you see?
Yeah.
But he's using the phrase as it's used in the book of Daniel.
That's interesting.
One like a son of man who is led into the presence of the Ancient of Days and was given glory, authority, and sovereign power, and all nations worshipped him. So it's a very provocative and loaded statement when Jesus calls himself the Son of Man in Aramaic.
Yes, he's not describing himself as a human.
No.
When he calls himself Son of Man.
No.
It's the old adage that the Son of God became the Son of Man, so we might become the sons of men might become the Son of God. It's cute, but it's not accurate, as in the sense of he's comparing himself with that glorious heavenly eschatological figure.
He is. He's basically saying...
Well, not comparing himself, he is that figure.
Yeah, he's basically saying the one that Daniel saw
is me,
that you didn't understand, he was talking about me, which is really powerful. And you can see why at the time, although Daniel was part of the Jewish scriptures, they didn't like it. And in fact, they stoned Stephen just for quoting from this passage in the book of Daniel. You remember when Stephen is dragged out and he gives his exposition.
Of course, yeah.
And then he looks up and he says, "Behold, I see the Son of Man coming up with the glory of the clouds of heaven." And they all kind of tear their clothes and say, "This man has spoken blasphemy." Actually, he's just quoted from the book of Daniel because that's what Daniel saw. So it's very loaded. And I think it's interesting because a lot of the messianic titles like Son of David and even Christ and Messiah had taken on different meanings, and people were expecting a political ruler who were going to free them from the Roman Empire and restore autonomy back to the Jewish state. But Jesus kind of very deliberately didn't choose any of those titles. He chose instead this one, that because of their lack of understanding, they hadn't touched. It was still uncorrupted.
Yeah.
And said, I'm the Son of Man, the one that Daniel saw.
Yeah. So again, we're finding a real theme of the book of Daniel being the sovereignty of God.
Yes.
So, and I find that the images in the second half of Daniel are just, they're so much more peaceful and gracious and glorious and beautiful compared with the kind of the ugliness and the terror and the unnaturalness of the first half.
Yes.
And I suppose one of the things that they're communicating is that God is in control over all this stuff.
Yeah.
He's not affected by it. It doesn't
That's
change
right.
him.
Yeah.
It doesn't make him less than he is. He remains the Ancient of Days. Jesus remains the Son of Man.
Yeah.
And these nations are going to come and go.
Yeah.
The kingdom's going to endure forever.
Amen.
Amen. That was a really helpful episode. Thank you ever so much, Chris. Really, really great to dive into Daniel 7 with you. And we'll be back very soon with another vision or two from the book of Daniel.